In the early days of my recovery, the early days when overcoming my addiction to alcohol and being given a new spirituality, a desire for living, the 12 steps. One of the things that I was told was keep it simple. And one of the hardest things in my life was to keep it simple. And the reason I couldn't keep it simple is because I had so many of my own ideas regarding the steps of recovery, or the spiritual steps to a higher understanding. I kept getting in the way with my own ideas. And it took a long time for me to learn, keep it simple. And that came, the ability to keep it simple only came after the awakening that occurred as a result of working these spiritual principles. Once I'd had the awakening, I realized there's actually no one working these principles. That the common denominator to the principles, to the application, how one applies the principles, the common the common denominator is awareness. I realized I wasn't doing anything. I mean, in the beginning, when we look at our powerlessness over separation, over our own pattern of self-contraction, that sort of is an illusory doership or experience of the body, the mind claiming the body. Really, you can only be aware of that. So after, post-awakening, I thought, oh my God, yeah, I can see that. I'm just aware of that. And it's just a dynamic. The ego is simply just a dynamic. It's the impulse to think your body sensation. That is self-contraction. That is ego. And again, what can you do? There's nothing you can do apart from the awareness. And then you realize that awareness is the doing. That is the understanding, awareness. But all my life, I'd given understanding, the illusion of understanding, to my mind, thinking, if I can understand this, if I can have these thoughts, if I can, what I see, try and change, that will work. But I didn't realize it, but that's just the mind claiming the experience all the time. So that had to stop. But it only stopped once I awakened to awareness being the root source of experience. So yeah, awareness was understanding of this process of disturbance in my body and how that manifested as self-contraction. It's just an instinct, and it's just a reflex. So I saw that. And so no longer was I identifying with this manifested self that self-contracted the body, what we call the I. So after that, I began to live as that awareness, which is a power greater than self-contraction, because awareness is transcendent of self-contraction, because awareness is not defined or qualified by self-contraction. So I could rest as that. That was the rallying point of sanity, was this awareness. And then, in the third stage of spirituality, where you start to turn the experience of the illusory self-contraction over to awareness being the root source of experience, again, it was remaining as awareness. And, if anything, the program became more simple, but actually harder to share, harder to explain to people. That was the weird thing. Because after the awakening, there was still, I was surrounded by a lot of people. This was in 1999. There was still a lot of people that were really into process and, diving into disturbances in the body and looking at the patterns that came out of it and trying to understand it and trying to change it. And, that's all well and good. But when you've had an awakening and you identify yourself as awareness, you come to see that your awareness is unqualified by that, And so you start to see, well, how does awareness undo that without this idea of doing something? Because that leads to self-contraction, that leads to the impulse of the mind claiming the experience. So as awareness, I began to see that I could just turn it over to awareness being the root source. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. And then if there was a disturbance and it was manifesting as this pattern to want to separate me, I would just discriminate, but remain as awareness, discriminate as awareness. So, and for me, recovery got a lot more simple, but in its simplicity, it kind of got deeper as well. So keeping it simple is something it's not that easy. to understand if you're trying to work it out with your head. But as soon as you start remaining as awareness, which most people don't want to do because it's too boring, you know, being an alcoholic or being an addict, we love the impulse. We like to do, we like to think, we like to perceive, we like the synapsing fire, we like to contract. That's what we're really addicted to. That's the addiction, is that self-obsession. When you start just remaining as awareness, you start to overcome that addiction, and you start to actually go through a withdrawal, and the withdrawal of that is boredom, to be honest with you. But again, you deepen as awareness. That's what you do. Yeah. That's what St. John of the Cross calls the night of sense, or the dark night of the soul, is when you realize that awareness is the way out. The awareness, when it rests in itself, is the self, it's not the body. And yet it's the root source of experience to the body. Here, not identifying with the body, so it's the thinker. You allow the thinker to start undoing. And then all of your forms, your natural pattern for life start to reassert themselves, or they start to return to their true orientation, which is that awareness. It's very interesting. It's very simple, but try getting your head around it. You won't. And if you can't get your head around it, you'll get bored of it and you'll do something else. The hardest thing to do is the most simple thing. It's the hardest thing to do. Remain as awareness and start really liking that more than anything. It's interesting, isn't it?